Mark Taylor-Canfield in Seattle. You got a report on what's going on out there, Mark?
Hey, I was just enjoying that segment with Jeff Cohen. I'd love to hear him talk more again about media democracy.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Very smart man.
Yeah. I really appreciate that kind of discussion because, I'm pretty committed to journalism these days, and I find myself going to the Reporters Without Borders website and finding out that on their World Press Freedom Index, the United States is now listed as 32nd in the world, which means, of course, that there are 31 other countries where at least this group thinks that there's more press freedom, more ability for journalists to do their job, and more access to vital information about society than is happening here.
Yeah.
And I need to point out, of course, that they're not accusing the United States of being a state-run media like a lot of other countries. What they're saying is that the corporate control of the airwaves has made it very difficult for even alternative media and new journalism to kind of get the word out to the rest of the population.
Yep.
And
this is the gift that Ronald Reagan gave us by, in 1982, ending the stopping enforcement of the Sherman Antitrust Act so that these giant monopolies could form, and then in 1987, ending the enforcement by the FCC of their fairness doctrine, which was actually formally taken off the books this year by President Obama, but it had not been enforced since 1987, so what the heck? And the fairness doctrine said if you are going to broadcast over the public airwaves, and frankly, I would be one who would argue it should extend to, from outer space or over the cable systems that go through our public rights-of-way, that if you're going to use the public airwaves, then the fee for that, as it were, is that you must at least program in the public interest, which means giving people real news rather than infotainment.
Plus, you had a Federal Communications Commission that, except for the two Democrats, Edelstein and Cox, were totally for more corporate media ownership consolidation.
Yeah.
And I testified before the FCC hearings on that issue and brought up two suppressed reports that the FCC itself had commissioned. One of the gentleman's names was Professor Yanich, and he had claimed that his studies on the effects of corporate media consolidation had been suppressed by the FCC. And when I asked the commissioners to respond to their own funded studies, they claimed that they didn't know that they existed. So what the studies showed was that corporate ownership of the media and this consolidation of corporate ownership results in less local coverage, less media ownership for minority and female portions of the community. And thank God you're on the air, and thank God Amy Goodman's on the air, and thank God we have free speech TV and free speech radio on Pacifica. Oh, and by the way, the Reporters Without Borders cited two different factors in the drop that the United States has experienced on their World Press Freedom Index over the last few years. And that has to do with, one, the arrests and harassment of a lot of reporters and journalists at the Occupy Wall Street protests, and then, two, this latest story about the surveillance of Associated Press reporters.
Yeah.
So those are issues that definitely come into play there.
So, Mark, it's time for us to start the chant. We get out in front of the TV cameras, we hold our signs up, and we proudly chant, "We're number 32! We're number 32!" Mark, thank you for the call. Excellent points all that you made, and thank you for sharing that with our listeners and our viewers.
The only country that had a free press.
Yeah.
It was our invention.
Yeah.
Tom Paine was the first independent journalist. He brought forward this incredibly radical notion that people could govern themselves, and he was a radical his whole life, and a great writer. So, yeah, we've had these ups and downs. So I don't want to say that, oh, the great old days and now everything sucks. But clearly in the mainstream media, there was a high point in the 70s, and because of corporate mergers, corporate greed, antitrust isn't enforced, we have been going downhill. The upswing in the last 10 years is the independent media, and that's largely because of the Internet, has helped everyone grow.
Yeah.
And in terms of the entrepreneurial spirit of Thom and Louise Hartmann working 11-hour days, yes, that's what it requires. But they've built up this big following. And your last question, yes, at the local level, newspapers, print newspapers are still hurting. What you're seeing is a lot of refugees, journalists from the print newspapers, the big dailies, are often setting up their own online news operations that cut out the cost of printing, cut out the cost of distribution, and trying somehow to monetize it.
Well, and there's a new resurgence for the old weeklies. What used to be the alternative weeklies in Vermont, it's called 7 Days. I believe they're doing very well.
Yeah.
And some of the, I believe that the Montpelier newspaper is still independently owned, the Times-Argus. And there's a bunch of these around the country that have not just hung on by their fingernails, but some of them are actually experiencing a renewal.
Yeah, it's a constant struggle, but in the mainstream dailies, which have produced most of the journalism in this country, still do. Most journalism that's chewed over on TV news and radio news comes from newspapers.
Right.
Same thing on the internet. And at the local level, a lot of them are suffering, which is why state houses, city councils, school boards don't have the reporter in the audience anymore. That's a recipe for corruption.
Right. And for ALEC and for...
No doubt. You're right. They step in, and where there's no journalist present. So it's problematic. It's, everything is uneven. Development is uneven. Declines are uneven. But as I say, the growth of independent media, the importance of Pacifica Radio, the importance of independent hosts like Thom Hartmann and Amy Goodman, that's the only bright spot for me in American political life, has been what's happened in the last dozen years in independent media.
Yeah. Flo in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, listening on KPTK's stream. Hi, Flo. You're on the air with me and Jeff.
I'd like to ask Mr. Cohen about, I think it's Warren Buffett buying up these small-town newspapers. Is that good for us? I mean, is he a liberal? I like to think he's more on the liberal side, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'll tell you this.
Mr. Cohen know about that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting development. What you have basically... Professor McChesney says you've got the newspapers that become, again, playthings for billionaires. And the cost of newspapers has gone down, and somehow these billionaires think that after initial losses, they're going to somehow turn it into a profit. Buffett has bought up a bunch of newspapers. My sense on these corporate executives is, like most corporate executives, media executives are liberal on social issues and conservative on the economic issues that affect their private or corporate wealth. That's the case for Jeff Bezos. He gave big money to gay marriage in the state of Washington. He also gave big money to defeat an income tax that would only have been on the top 1% in the state of Washington. Bezos, who now owns...
luxury...
No, they don't even have an income tax. Yeah, it was a 1%, and it was just going to be on the top 1%. You had to earn $200,000 as an individual or $400,000 a year as a couple, and Bezos helped defeat it. He's conservative on union policy, he's conservative on education policy, and he's part of the surveillance state with the contract that Amazon has just received. So I'm assuming, from what I know of Mr. Buffett, he's certainly not a right-winger. I think he's liberal on a lot of social issues. But, they're not the kind of owners we need. We need independent owners. We need journalists in control. We need nonprofits where the journalists make the decisions on what news is and what news isn't.
And we need to go back to pre-82 when Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Act and have local ownership so that the local owners of the newspapers have to face their readers every day. I mean, literally and physically.
Right. And I mean, right now we have too many monopoly-owned daily newspapers.
Yes.
And because they're now single newspaper cities, I think that's why Buffett felt he could turn it into a profit.
Yeah, we used to live in Portland, Oregon, and the biggest newspaper there is owned by a corporation in New York State. It's like, really? Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. We have 2 minutes to the break. Bob, real quick one for Jeff?
Sure, yeah. Tom and Louise, hats and feathers to you.
Thank
all
you.
The work you do. We understand that 12-hour day. We are independents. We are supporters of democracy. And, Jeff, it's good to hear you on the air. It's just I'm just giving you kudos here.
Thank you.
And I'm saying that democracy is alive and well. It's not necessarily on the air.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what we're noticing, and we'd like it to be on the air more.
Okay, great. Bob, so how do we get democracy on the air more? Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, well, I think the issue is people using this amazing tool, which is still free, which is the Internet. We still have net neutrality.
And we
still
have to fight for net neutrality.
Right. We have to fight to keep it, and we use the Internet to spread the word about these amazing broadcasts. You can take these segments from Thom Hartmann, the Amy Goodman segments, send it to people that aren't watching now, aren't listening now. The Internet is a real tool for organizing and democracy and activism at this moment in history, and we need to use it to bolster these independent sources of news. It's an exciting time to be a journalist. That's what I teach my kids. I teach independent media and journalism department, and there's a lot of, I've got an intern who's working at Free Speech TV.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the good news, is these independent outlets. And for those of us who are privileged enough to know about them, we have to spread the word. We have to donate. The way you build democracy is building independent media. You can't have a democracy without a free, independent, and adversarial news media.
Yeah. Speaking in the fourth estate, functionally the fourth branch of government.
Yes.
Holding the others accountable and holding them in check. Jeff Cohen, Jeff, I know you've got a meeting you've got to boogie out to, so we're going to take a break here. But
it's been great.
It has. And check out fair.org and
rootsaction.org, which is an online activism organization, independent.
I have to learn more about that. We got to do a program just about that. Jeff Cohen, we'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And Roots Action, depending on what part of the country you're from, with an S, action.org. The site that Jeff Cohen, our earlier guest, co-founded from the previous hour. They've got a bunch of cool things. A petition to ban weaponized drones from the world. A petition to nominate Bradley Manning for the Nobel Peace Prize. There's Mr. President, hands off Edward Snowden. The budget debate needs an intervention. It's unacceptable that President Obama is keeping a reporter in prison in Yemen. Actually, that guy got freed ultimately, so that's pretty good news.